Good evening, everybody. The League of Women Voters of Oxford, North Mississippi welcomes you to the second of 4 forums introducing the 8 candidates for the new position of county judge in Lafayette County. I am Ruth Odell, and I'm co-president of the League of Women Voters Oxford, North Mississippi, along with my compatriot, Ruby Kelly. The League of Women, the League has conducted many forums over the last 2 years, and we've learned a lot about what works and what doesn't. So here are the procedures for the evening. Please remain on mute throughout the forum. Put your questions in the chat and the moderators will ask them to the candidates. Ms. Amy Reeder is our timekeeper, and she will be using colored cards to time all the speakers, even the moderators. Each candidate has 10 minutes for an opening statement and 5 minutes for a closing statement. There are 25 minutes allotted for questions and answers. Amy, show the audience and the candidates your cards so they know where you are and how it works.
You have to unmute Amy, please. Amy, you need to unmute, please.
She's trying. Just show the cards, Amy. You don't have to say anything. Yeah, so there you are. She's got your 10 minutes. It's the good old colors of red, yellow for caution, and pinky red for stop. So, all righty. Also remember that this is not a debate, it's a forum, and that is different. Just a reminder to everyone that the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that does not support specific candidates. We are issue-oriented, and you will see that in the questions that we'll pose to the candidates. Both candidates have completed a bio and a questionnaire on the League's Vote for One website. And I've put 2 links in the chat. One is our website, and I will be putting all the recordings and all the bios and questionnaires in the blog section of our website. So you'll click on that little link there and go to blog of the issues, and you'll be able to find everything. But for those of you who are not quite technology, gurus yet, I've also put a Google Drive link there. And so you could go there and see all the bios of all the candidates who have responded and the recordings as we add them. Let's see, now I'm going to turn it over to our moderators. We have Don Mason and Joanne Gabrinowitz, who are both retired law professors from the University of Mississippi. Over to y'all.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. This is an opportunity to participate in a historic event in Lafayette County. Lafayette County has reached a population that state law requires a county court be established. And so we're going to be in this series speaking to all 8 candidates who are asking for our vote to become the first county judge for Lafayette County Court. To participate, please put your questions in the chat. I'm not going to go into the bios of our speakers, which are very extensive and impressive, because they will be available to you through the chat, and we'll spend our time tonight listening to the candidates. And we go in alphabetical order according to last name. And so our first opening statement tonight, well, before I do that, let me introduce my colleague, Don Mason, who is the other moderator this evening, and who will also be asking questions of the candidates. And with that, our first speaker tonight will be Mr. Steve Jubera, who has a 10-minute opening statement. Oh, and a reminder, this is not a debate, so we're not going back and forth between the candidates. We're giving candidates their time to tell us why they deserve to be the judge. Go ahead, Mr. Jubera.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Don, and thank you to the League of Women Voters. As a way of introduction, I just want to apologize. I tend to talk with my hands, so you might see a lot of this going on. I'm going to do everything I can to keep that to a minimum. I'm a longtime resident of Lafayette County. I moved here to attend the Ole Miss School of Law, graduated along with several other people, and these were two of my favorite professors, and it's very interesting and fun to see them in this context.
You don't have to
Everybody,
to us. We don't owe you grades anymore.
I do want to start off with I am Professor Kabrinowicz's class. I got the highest grade in her class, for whatever that's worth, and it was one of my favorite classes. Things that are actually important to me, I think that's what voters should know. Start off as a family man. I'm a husband. I've been married to Holly Jubera for the past 22 years. I have 4 wonderful children. Katie's made me a grandfather twice over. Jimmy is currently a Marine reservist. Bobby and Mary are both at Oxford High. Bobby is currently in the band getting ready to march today. I am a Christian. I am strong in my faith. Currently serving as an assistant district attorney and have been in that capacity for the past 16 years. I'm also a Marine Corps veteran. When I think about the things that led me to where I am today, my parents, obviously, my father was a Marine. He instilled many values. My mother gave me a great work ethic, and I've been blessed to have good role models. When I attended boot camp in 1995, you get off an airplane, you get yelled at for 13 weeks, and you start to rethink many decisions that you made. But that experience laid a foundation of discipline, precision, and the desire to do what is actually right at the end of the day, and the ability to be put on the hot seat when time arises. I remember I was deployed with the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit in 1998 to Pakistan in May. At that time, Pakistan tested their nuclear device. We were the closest major military asset in the area. I was an intel analyst at the time, so I look over my shoulder. I was on the night watch, and I've got a full bird colonel over here, and I've got a naval captain over here, and they need the data that I've got to make decisions real time on what to do. I was definitely put on the hot seat, both of them looking at me to give them the information that they needed. Because of my service on the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit, I was awarded the Navy Achievement Medal. I also served at the Joint Intelligence Center Pacific in the China shop, again, providing real-time intelligence to mission planners and boots on the ground, so to speak. And I was awarded the Joint Service Achievement Medal. My time in the Marines really set me off as my career of service with a 4-year degree in discipline and leadership. Went to college, started my family, 2 children, starting law school, and one of the most amazing experiences of my life. And upon graduation, was hired on as a district attorney, assistant district attorney for the 17th Circuit, where I've served for almost the entirety of my career. I've been a very aggressive prosecutor of cases where children have been victims. As a matter of fact, my first jury trial was a child sex case, and we were able to get a conviction and really learn firsthand what it takes to not just get justice done for the child, but also make sure that child's taken care of before the case, that services are available for that child, during that we're utilizing the the district attorney's office's victim witness coordinator, and also after, where that child, you don't want to just leave her to the whims of the people that are around her. You want to provide everybody that's in that child support group with the with what she needs to basically thrive. So we were able to provide that child and many children after with follow-on mental health services, counseling, therapy, really just give that child the opportunity to do the best that she can throughout her life. There was as Lafayette County's grown, we know at that time I was serving in DeSoto County, DeSoto County's population also grew and grew very dramatically. There's a need for a child advocacy center. I was able to partner with a very aggressive counselor. We did what needed to be done, and we were able to set up Healing Hearts Child Advocacy Center, which currently is exists today. I also facilitated that team. So we needed to stand up a multidisciplinary team to best examine and look at each and every case of child abuse that was reported countywide. So we were able to partner with law enforcement, mental health professionals, doctors, counselors, and make sure that that child, again, from beginning to end, is taken care of while we're trying to meet the ends of justice and make sure what happens during the course of the criminal justice process is in the best interest of that child. Over the course of that time and in working, I was able to gain a good reputation in that community and experience. I currently serve as a member of the review board for the Jackson Diocese, the northern part of the state. So if there's ever an allegation of clergy abuse in the church, my board listens to evidence, makes a recommendation to the bishop as far as what to do to best protect children and hold clergy accountable for what they do. I also serve on the National Review Board, which is our child advocacy, which makes policy recommendations on how to best protect children nationwide. I currently serve as the chair of the audit committee, which is our check, so to speak, to make sure that the various parishes across the country are doing what they need to do to protect children. I want to talk a little bit about intervention courts because those are something that is extremely important to me, and I think that is an opportunity for us to really excel and work people out of the system and work people into society. For those who aren't familiar with intervention courts, they're typically called the drug court, where they have the regular requirements to report to the court, drug testing, therapy, AANA type meetings. And if they complete the drug court, there's the carrot, so to speak, is the charge that was levied against them in most cases can be taken off of their record. The stick, however, the consequence for not complying, for not working the steps and not doing what it takes to get clean and sober is you may receive the entirety of your sentence. The law allows for veterans courts as well as mental health courts. I think mental health courts are a real opportunity for us in this state, especially in Lafayette County, where using a model similar to drug court, we can provide those most in need of mental health treatment, especially those who are seriously mentally ill, what they need in order to avoid unfortunate consequences with law enforcement, to keep the people around them, their families safe, and keep them safe as well. If somebody has a inability to reason regularly without proper medication, having them report to a court regularly to make sure that they're staying on their medication, that they're not taking illicit substances that will often counteract the ability of their medication for them to stay under control, it's a detriment to that individual and to society in general. In closing, I'd like to offer, I do have a lifetime of experience. I've served my country as a Marine. I've served my state as a prosecutor. And I believe now is the time for me to serve my county as a first county court judge. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. We will now go on to hear from Mr. James B. Justice. Your turn, James.
Thank you. First, want to begin by thanking everyone who is logged on tonight to watch this live, as well as everyone who downloads this video to watch it later. What I've talked to everyone since I made the decision to run for county court judge, and what I've been most heartened by in our community is the level of engagement that we've had, the questions that have come. I can remember the first time I spoke at a public event. I was invited by a friend of mine to come and talk during an intermission set between sets at a musical performance. And it was in the lobby of the Graduate Hotel. And I was completely, I knew that everybody really wanted me to just be quiet and sit back down so that the music could resume. And I was heartened and just overwhelmed with joy when hands started popping up across the audience to ask questions about this court, what I was running for, why the court was created. It makes me feel good about my community to know that you care, because that's the reason that I am in this race, because I care. I care about what happens to our children. I care about what happens on the civil docket and the criminal docket. Now, I'm not going to go over my biography. That information's been provided by the League of Women Voters, who I'd like to thank for hosting these events. I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and doing them via Zoom allows access when maybe you couldn't go to a live event at the courthouse or the Chancery building or one of the community centers, as well as our moderators tonight, Professor Mason, Professor Gabrinowitz from the University of Mississippi School of Law. Now, one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, did you grow up here in Lafayette County? And the answer to that is no. I only got here as fast as I could. I grew up in Alcorn County, Mississippi. I went to Alcorn Central High School. I graduated as salutatorian. My family was going through some changes when I left for college. I was the youngest. My dad was having to work away from home. I made the decision because to me, family came first. To stay close, I went to Northeast Community College, graduated there with honors. In 2000, I moved here to Oxford, actually not to Oxford, I moved into Lafayette County. I was later annexed into the city of Oxford, lived off Old Taylor Road in Lafayette County when I first got here. So I've been here for 22 years. I have chosen to make Lafayette County my home, and it's probably up there with the best decisions in my life. I'll put it right behind, first of all, marrying my beautiful wife, Bridget. We have 2 daughters, Kylie, and our youngest is Jeree. We planned it very well so that we could stay within the school district, because Kylie graduated in the class of 22, and my youngest Jeree is now a kindergartner in the Oxford School District. So I get another 13 years in the district. So Kylie started in first grade, so I'll have 25 years in the Oxford School District when we get done getting her through the Oxford schools. Proud to also have relationship with the Lafayette County schools as well. Family members that have been administrators, teachers, friends who work there. We have wonderful schools here in Lafayette County, and I think that part of the reason for that is the community engagement that I talked about earlier. Now, I know that you've had an introduction about county court. One of the things that I am most proud of is that my career, my legal career, which I've been practicing law now going on my 18th year, has been in those three areas. I've been practicing civil law, I've been practicing criminal law, and I've been practicing law involving families and children. That is typically in youth court, which your county court judge will be your full-time youth court judge, as well as in chancery court, because a lot of youth court cases, a lot of cases involving children ultimately are resolved in chancery court. They may begin in youth court through an abuse or neglect proceeding or a delinquency or truancy proceeding, and then they find themselves in a custody modification where you have parents who are divorced or otherwise not living together raising children. Now, one of the things that has helped me in that has been my community engagement involvement. I was proud to get the opportunity to watch Professor Mason give the overview of the candidates and the court that he did. And one thing that it led me to notice was that I didn't talk a lot about that in my biography. So I think this is a great time to tell you about where I've been in the community. Habitat for Humanity was one of the first organizations when I was a student that I got involved in, and also the Oxford Lafayette County Literacy Council. Those were two of the very first organizations that I was able to volunteer with. Since then, have worked with the Oxford Lafayette Humane Society, which later became Mississippi Critters, which has now changed again. But I've adopted pets, donated food, swept out the kennels, helped feed dogs, fix staplers, whatever could be done to help at the Humane Society, similarly with the other organizations that I mentioned. I believe that why elect me? Why should you pick me as your county court judge? Well, I've told you about the three areas of experience. You're going to need a judge who's ready to go on day one. That is me. Not only have I practiced in the three main areas this court is going to cover, I've also been running a small business for now going on my 17th year. I had a law partner when I founded my firm in Oxford in 2006. He and I amicably dissolved our partnership, founded my current law firm in 2010. And since then have been running a small business. So I understand how to manage a budget and be prepared to oversee not only the court budget, but also the court staff. So I have that experience to be able to begin on day one as your county court judge, handling not only the legal side of it, but also the business operations of the court. I have a lot of ideas that I've talked about, but the one that I began with at the very first candidate forum that I attended was to use the drug court model in our youth court system. Now, I talked a moment ago, youth court, usually we deal with abused and neglected, usually younger children. Those are usually older children. Now, there's a generalized category of at-risk children that the statutes define as children in need of supervision. They use the acronym CHINS to refer to them. What do we know about this? We know that most of the parents who are in there because of abuse or neglect violations, or older children who are there because they're in that CHINS group, or they're delinquent or truant, meaning they've truant not attending school, delinquent have committed something that would otherwise be a crime. We've got two main driving issues. We've got mental health issues and we've got drug addiction issues. Why use a drug court model? Drug courts are effective. You can look at the numbers. There is a strong likelihood that if you graduate from a drug court, that you will not reoffend, you will not re-enter the criminal justice system. When we look at criminal justice statistics, we know the range varies, the number varies, but it's around 95%, depending on which report you're looking at. We know that model works. Those are incredible numbers in the legal system to be on the north side of 90%. So my philosophy is, let's take that. It's drug court's a 5-phase system. You start in phase 1, most restrictive, regular drug testing, being required to meet, also being required to do things like meet with counselors, psychiatrists, even can be required to do inpatient treatment, because we take every case as it comes. Not everyone, you can't use a one-size-fits-all model. Not every case in youth court is going to fit into this model, but I think a substantial amount will. And what we're going to do, and what I'm going to do, is be prepared to listen and respond when things work and they don't work. But we're going to use that model in our youth court to try to go from most restrictive to least restrictive. What that's going to do is it's going to tell us our parents who are committed to getting mental health stability, who are committed to becoming sober, to continuing their sobriety, and thus being reunited with their children. I am also a believer in family placement. What is family placement? When you have a child that enters youth court and they need to be placed somewhere beside the home, we're going to look to relatives first so that the parent-child bond can remain intact while we work them through the youth court system. Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Justice. All right, we will now go into the portion of our program where Don and I will ask questions, each for 10 minutes. And I'm going to start with Mr. Jubera. In one of your questions that you answered for the league, you referred to a multidisciplinary approach to child abuse. What disciplines are to be included in the multidisciplinary approach?
Obviously, it's going to vary from case to case, but for the most part, you're going to deal with mental health professionals. If you have a case where there's physical abuse, obviously you want to start off with medical professionals. And where you have cases of failure to thrive, which is often referred to, you want to make sure there's a doctor that's looking at that child. Typically, you're dealing with a younger child, but sometimes they get older, tracking that child over the period of time. Law enforcement, for the most part, law enforcement, it really has a good idea of what's going on the street level, so to speak. So they're going to be able to tell whether or not that child is complying with requirements of, say, house arrest, for instance. Additionally, obviously, in the multidisciplinary teams that I've been a part of, prosecution is absolutely critical to that. So prosecution tends to act as a hub. As I stated in my opening remarks, I was the facilitator of the team that I was a part of. So we were able to get communications back and forth. And obviously, Child Protective Services, your social workers, they have training that we don't. And it all has to work in a function of a mutual respect where, Child Protective Services is going to have one mission, which is typically in the context that I've dealt with, family reunification, when a prosecutor might have a completely different view that the perpetrator needs to go to prison. So those tend to be opposite one another. You have to treat each member of the team with respect, understand that they're going to come from a different role, and you communicate back and forth where, for the most part, you're going to be able to reach a good middle ground solution that's in the best interest of the child, as opposed to competing social model, social work models versus law enforcement models.
Okay, thank you. James, I have a question for you again. This is based on your responses to the questions that were submitted to you. How will you determine when it is not possible to, quote, preserve a family in youth court?
Well, that's part of what I just talked about in my opening statement. It's going to be dealing with the evidence, the facts that are presented to the court. And that's going to be through mental health stability and through sobriety. If you're continually failing drug tests because and failing to take your medication as prescribed, what you're telling the court in that instance is, I'm not willing to put in the effort, the work, to work toward reunification with my child. That is the message that you're sending, not just to the court, but to the community at large. It's also why what I was ending my opening statement on is so important, which is family placement. Family placement involves looking at a relative that is those two things, stable and sober. If we've got a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, someone who is already in a child's life, who that child knows, who that child has a relationship with, and we can place that child in that relative's home, that's what we should be doing first. Why? Because one, that's going to allow us to preserve a parent-child relationship. Parents typically in these scenarios have what's called supervised visitation, meaning you don't get to just come and pick up your child and take them for a visit. In that instance, there is someone who's watching over it. Having that family member placed there is going to allow that parent to keep the bond, allow the child to keep the bond. I think that's going to help us have fewer parents who are unwilling to make the effort to stay on, to see the mental health counselors, psychiatrists, to get stable, to stay off the illicit substances, the drugs, because usually that's what we see. We're self-medicating from a mental health problem.
Forgive me, Mr. Justice, we just have a little time. What happens if you do not find a family member, a cousin, a grandparent? There is no stable family member in the nuclear family or the extended family. What happens then?
So the backup to that is the foster care system, finding a foster parent, placing the child in a foster parent home, so where they have those things, where they have sobriety, where they have stability, and where they're not being traumatized. The reason family placement is so important to me is because often we re-traumatize children by taking them out of a bad situation and putting them into a totally foreign situation, people they don't know. Now, sometimes that is the best, that is the only best recourse that we have. But what we need to do and what we need to make sure we're emphasizing is looking for the family or even the family friend, even if it's not a blood relative, right? It may be a neighbor that is not blood related, but who has a bond, has a connection. Maybe it's another child, a playmate of that child. Maybe it's their parents. Finding those people who are going to allow the child to more seamlessly transition into a new environment while we give the parents the opportunity to become stable, become sober, and reunite their families.
Okay, thank you. Steve, is economic development an appropriate reason for eminent domain? For example, you tear down a house to establish a shopping mall, as opposed to tear down a house to establish a public park.
So that's actually very tough because I can actually see both sides of it. I went to the University of Illinois at Chicago. If anybody's seen the Blues Brothers, directly south of UIC is Maxwell Street. Maxwell Street was where Ray's Music Exchange took place. And at the time, it was a very vibrant African-American community, a center for blues culture in Chicago. I love the blues.
I just want to remind you, we only have about another minute.
Okay. There has to be an extremely high burden placed upon the state in order for that to justify for purely economic reasons, as opposed to a more general social reason, such as something that a individual could not do on their own.
Thank you. And my last question for you, James, is can you please say more about, quote, the punishment should fit the crime? What does that mean?
Well, it means that you have to look at cases on a case-by-case basis. One of the important things is your youth court judge. Dave Bell has served as our part-time youth court judge for a number of years. your county court judge is going to be full-time youth court judge. And what that's going to enable me to do on a day-to-day basis is look at each particular case. And when we're talking about, whether we're talking about youth court or whether we're talking about criminal sentencing, to look at the particular facts. Now, we haven't, it's important to note, and I know we don't have much time, but youth court doesn't work on a traditional adversarial system like your criminal county court does. Youth court is a collaborative court. The idea is the prosecutor, the defender, the guardian ad litem, we're working together to come up with solutions collaboratively. On the criminal side, it's up to the criminal defense attorney and the prosecutor to submit the facts. If someone is guilty, but there are mitigating circumstances, mitigating means something to say, this did happen, this crime was committed, but there's a reason that it's not as bad as take an assault, for example. Say that someone thought they were defending themselves and attacked the wrong person, right? They thought they were being attacked by person A, they were actually being attacked by person B. They may be guilty of assault against person A, but that misunderstanding can provide a mitigating factor, as opposed to someone who just goes, I'm going to start a fight with this person because I don't like it.
Okay. Thank you, James. Don, it's your turn. Take it away.
Okay, gotta get myself unmuted here. Thank you, and good evening, everyone. This is my opportunity to welcome you as well. I'm glad you could attend, despite I know we have a lot of competing things going on this evening. Okay, my area is, as I'm sure both of you gentlemen can recall, is primarily in the criminal area. So I'm very tempted to just ask you a bunch of questions about that. But I actually want to quickly revisit, at the risk of sort of driving this into the ground, but revisit this whole area of family reunification and so forth, and foster care versus family placement, et cetera, et cetera. My question for each of you, but let's start with James again, Mr. Justice. When, in your view, does it become necessary and prudent to terminate parental rights? In other words, how long are you going to allow this process to go on with the child being placed in an unfamiliar setting, maybe successive foster placements and so forth? How are you going to expedite that process? How long, when does it become necessary to terminate parental rights?
Well, Professor Mason, the first thing, I don't know that it's always necessary to expedite the process. And that's where you get to a case-by-case basis. If you have an individual who is struggling with a mental health issue, self-medicating, but is progressing, that person, I think, is entitled to a greater allowance of time than someone who, to the court and again to the community at large, makes it clear they're not making an effort to get there. So it's hard to say it's going to be 6 months or 9 months or a year, because again, you have to meet the people where they are, right? If we have, we have a lot of mental health services that people don't even know exist, don't even know that they have access to.
Okay.
So you're going to have, and that's why this movement from part-time youth court to full-time youth court, I think, is significant. So if you ask me, if I have someone who's making no effort, I'm going to have a very short leash with that person. If I have someone who is trying, I'm going to extend them more grace and more opportunity to get on their feet.
Okay, Mr. Jubera, I want to give you the opportunity to respond to that as well.
Sure. It's my viewpoint is what's in the best interest of the child. If right out the gate we can see that reunification is going to have a serious detrimental effect on the child, obviously that time frame is going to be shorter. If the parents are working and it's the child's status is getting better, the child's ability to perform in school, social engagements, things, physical and mental health are improving, then that process should go on a little bit longer. Obviously not ad infinitum where it just never ends, but it has to be, in my viewpoint, what's in the best interest of the child. If it's, again, my prosecutorial mindset is and I've unfortunately I've handled these cases before. There's no set of circumstances where the child is going to be safe inside that home. I don't see dragging it out for 6, 8, 9 months. And I've seen that happen, unfortunately, where the process has been drawn out, where mom and dad are sitting in jail for awaiting trial for capital murder when at the end of the day, it just needs to be done and get a good solid placement that would be in the best interest of that child.
Okay, I want to quickly now move to the area of the criminal cases that you will handle, perhaps. Well, we know you'll have some under your original jurisdiction, but you may be referred some significant criminal cases from the circuit court. And you mentioned this a little bit, Mr. Justice, mitigating circumstances. But so my question to you, I guess, is if you've given this some thought, or if you just know kind of by your own nature, in sentencing in those cases, will your default, if you will, be to look at the maximum sentence and then look to see if there are mitigating circumstances, or the other way around? Would you default at the minimum sentence and look to see if there are aggravating factors? Mr. Jubera.
So almost never, for a first-time offender, you're never really defaulting to the maximum sentence unless it's a maximum crime. Murder, sexual battery of a child, things of that nature, you're defaulting more towards the maximum, or in cases of murder, where you're dealing with a sentence that's in words, not numbers, life, you don't have really a whole lot of options. But if you're working in a case where there's a crime where there's a spectrum, I would suspect we see a whole lot of burglaries of dwelling, and those vary dramatically, and the sentences vary dramatically. 3 is the minimum, 25 years is the maximum. I would tend to, for a first-time offender, look way towards the minimum as opposed to the maximum, unless it's a very, very egregious set of circumstances.
But I take it for subsequent offenses, that's not the case.
Exactly. You
Okay.
take the defendant as they arrive.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
3 turns into 6,
So-
like that.
We're going to run short on time. So, Mr. Justice, quickly, if you could, what's your view on that?
Well, my viewpoint is that in the absence of a crime of violence, usually prison is not the answer. We know that most crimes that are nonviolent crimes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Could you repeat that again? In a crime of violence?
I said a nonviolent. crime.
Nonviolent crime. Okay.
If we're dealing with a nonviolent crime offense, a drug offense, a property offense, what we see a lot of the times are grand larceny, bad check cases, even residential, non-residential burglary cases. What we have underlying that is a substance abuse problem, and we get back to this drug court scenario. If we can find an intervention, whether it be pretrial intervention, prosecutors and courts have a number of things at their disposal. One of them is what's something called pretrial diversion. It's where you don't even take a case into the system in terms of setting it for trial. The person accused enters into an agreement that's overseen by the district attorney's office, and they essentially work through an informal probation with the district attorney's office to not have their crime prosecuted, have their charge dismissed. Okay. Those are the things that we need to be utilizing, especially in nonviolent crimes, as well as drug courts, non-adjudications. Mississippi has the most people in prison per capita of anywhere in the world, not just the United States, in the world. And it costs all of us money to house prisoners. So what we have to do is find ways to break that circuit before we're at a place with an offender who's a second offender, third offender, where that's left as your only option is to incarcerate someone.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think Amy's about to cut me off. So let me quickly ask you one more question for each of you. Moving now to the civil arena, those cases under $200,000 that you may handle. It's long been a problem in the court system and the legal profession, the costs of litigation and the delays involved. Now, if you are this county court judge, how are you going to manage those civil cases so as to reduce litigation costs and delays? Mr. Justice, if you could quickly, just A short answer.
I can answer it with 2 words: scheduling orders. I've worked with members of the civil defense bar. I've worked with members of the plaintiff's bar. I've handled cases on both sides of it. What we know is that if you put a scheduling order in place, when a civil case is filed, once an answer is filed and you have deadlines where the lawyers are required to report to the court, hey, here's what we're doing. We need more time. We need less time. What we know is it's going to make for faster cases, resolving faster. And if they're resolved faster, guess what? They're going to be able to be resolved with fewer attorney's fees, less delays, and more timely.
Mr. Jubera.
I'd like to say James is nuts, but he's right. The only thing I would add is compelled mediation.
Compelled mediation?
Yes, where the 2 parties have to, at least at some point in time, try to reach an agreement. And if there's a complete disagreement as to the facts of what happened, obviously we have a jury system in place, or the court can make that determination. But if all they're doing is fighting over $75,000 versus $85,000, you put the 2 of them in a room together for an afternoon, they might be able to reach an agreement.
Who would conduct that mediation?
And that's going to be by agreement between the parties, which is easier said than done. However, that simple rule would save a whole lot of court time.
Okay. And here we come. There's the stop. Okay. Thank you. Well, there are more questions in the chat, which we'll get to next.
We'll do that now. Thank you, Don. Okay, now we're going to be taking questions from the audience. And the first question we have is for both of you. So I'll ask Steve Jubera to go first and then James Justice to go second. And the first question for both of you is, do you think that racial and class bias are a problem in our judicial system?
Racial and class bias are something that you'll never be able to completely get away from. You have to look at each individual as they come before the court. So if you're looking at an individual that would come before my court, for instance, I don't believe it's there. And you put 100 judges in a room, they're all going to say, as a general principle, no, I'm racial colorblind. I apply no bias one way or another. However, there are other issues that go along with the racial bias. You do have a long history, especially in this state, of racial issues that cannot easily be forgotten. You have the ability for some individual classes of people to leave an area as opposed to those that are left behind that have to remain in the area. For instance, I prosecute West Tallahatchie County. A lot of folks have moved from the Clarksdale area. They have moved. We have a lot of residents in Lafayette County that were former residents of Clarksdale that left a lot of folks behind. There's a lot of realities that have to be taken into account when answering that question. It's a lot more complex, but it does exist. You can't pretend that it doesn't.
Thank you. James Justice, please.
Any human system is going to be riddled with biases, including racial and class biases. Professor Mason's question just a moment ago about the cost of civil litigation, if you want to look at where class biases change, if you have the money to defend, whether it be a civil or a criminal matter, hire a privately retained attorney, you are going to have an advantage over someone who does not have those resources. That is a part of the human system that we have. The legal system is made up of us as human beings. And so we are all a product of our environment. There are always going to be racial class biases so long as people exist in the world. Now, what can we do? The better question, or not necessarily the better question, but the follow-up question is, what can we do about it? And that's to be aware of it, right? Awareness is where you can begin. That's what I pledge to do, is to be aware of when there are things, whether it be with myself where I need to recuse myself from a case, or whether it be an attorney or a litigant that's practicing before me to try to address those biases and make sure we remove them from the decision-making process, where the court is simply looking at the facts as they can best be determined to exist and the law, and applying those facts to the law.
Thank you. The next question is from a member of the audience who says she is particularly interested in the youth court and how might both school systems work with the youth court to prevent youth offenses and to intervene with young people. We'll go with Mr. Jubera and then Mr. Justice.
We both have kids in the school system, so we both have experience dealing with the school system. But from my perspective, as a prosecutor, and again, working with multidisciplinary teams, there's a huge gap. The school counselors have no idea what's going on after a child, say, reports that they've been sexually abused, for instance. They really need to be integrated better into what we do, both with the youth court system, on the delinquency side, as well as the abuse and neglect side. Our teachers are the ones that see our kids on a regular basis, and they've got a whole lot of good information on how we can deal with these children on an individualized basis, where this is a good kid, and if you were to address this issue that we think is going on at home, they might be a great kid, for instance. So school counselors at both Lafayette as well as Oxford High absolutely need to be integrated into that system, even if they just present themselves as a witness, because they have a good idea of what's going on. Also, they need to know, in many cases, how to deal with a child that's been suffered abuse or neglect, to make sure that they're doing the right thing. I've talked to several counselors recently retired that's a point of frustration for them.
Thank you. James?
Behavioral interventionist counselors. There's two types of intervention that your school counselors typically work within: academic intervention and behavioral intervention. Academic intervention is when we have children, no matter what the age, whether we're talking about kindergarten or whether we're talking about a senior in high school who is behind schedule on the academic schedule. They're not prepared to move from kindergarten to first grade, or they're not prepared to graduate from the 12th grade. On the other side of that pendulum, though, is behavioral interventionists. Those are people who are the counselors in the school that are dealing with specifically with behavioral problems, trying to intervene, helping as a coordinator, being a part of the team to coordinate, whether it be with the parents, with a mental health provider that the child is seeing, whether that's privately or through Communicare. That is where I think what we need to do, or what I would advocate for through my both school districts, the city school district, Oxford school district, as well as the Lafayette County school district, is to invest in behavioral interventionists. Because what we know is, if we can intervene earlier, right? If we can intervene with children when they're in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, we're going to have a greater chance of success and not needing to intervene with that child when they're in high school and it is becoming a delinquency. They're doing something that's criminal, or they're truant, they're not coming to school, or otherwise having more serious issues.
Now here's another question for both of you, and this time we'll start with James and then we'll go to Steve. Question for both of you. What is the OLU community's most pressing legal problem? And that's Oxford Lafayette University, OLU. What's the most pressing legal problem?
To my mind, it is the drug problem in our community. And I mean methamphetamine, I mean fentanyl, I mean cocaine, opiates. That's one of the most pressing. It's why I'm such an advocate. One of the things that I've asked is, if I'm elected, I will ask our circuit court judges to grant me as county court judge jurisdiction over the Lafayette County Drug Court, as well as all felony drug cases on the docket. Now, I talked earlier, it's not always a drug case that should put you in drug court. Sometimes it's a property case. But to me, that is the biggest issue that we have. And it is what I would put as number two is the rising violent crime that we have. A lot of people, we live in a wonderful community. And unless you're like me and you're in Lafayette County Circuit Court and you read the criminal docket and you see the murder cases, the aggravated assault, the sexual battery, those crimes of violence, you may be unaware that these things are even happening in our community, but they are happening. And they're, as our population grows and as we are falling behind in addressing the first problem, which is the addiction problem, which is coupled with mental health as well, that is only going to make the secondary problem of violent crime increase faster and become a larger problem over time.
Okay, Steve.
Mental health is, in my opinion, the most pressing problem that we can actually gain some traction on. First and foremost, you have to focus on the seriously mentally ill, bipolar schizophrenics, those individuals who habitually lack reason.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here just to be true to the question that the audience member Matt asked.
Sure.
The most pressing legal problem. So if you're going to talk about mental health issues, is there a legal component to that?
Right. Yeah. No. So the Chancery Court has obviously the ability to civilly commit somebody. That's a process that is long and it's ugly and it is horribly managed. You get somebody who is bipolar schizophrenic, they have to sit in jail, taking up space, costing our county a significant amount of money before they're even seen at Whitfield. And often those issues compound one on top of another. So the bipolar schizophrenic, again, somebody who lacks reason, will commit crimes. Now, they're a different individual than somebody who has other lesser mental illness. Think of somebody who's depressed, not taking away from somebody who suffers from clinical depression, but those folks don't commit crimes. Individuals who habitually lack reason do. So as a legal matter, that's someplace that we can get a whole lot of traction with some very easy reforms. One of the things that I've looked at extensively is what's called AOC, advanced outpatient commitment, where an individual, instead of sitting in jail waiting to go to Whitfield for treatment, they're on the street. And obviously we're talking about a certain particular class of individuals who has good resources on the outside, who has a good ability to make it to a therapist or counselor or mental health professional without clogging up our jails and report to the court on a regular basis for substance tests. We know that people who will self-medicate to try to treat their mental illness, that often counteracts the ability or the effect of whatever the doctor is giving them and prescribing them, leading to very adverse consequences. In my mind, that's the most serious thing where we can actually affect the change and affect it very reasonably and very cost effectively.
Okay, and again, this is to both of you now. What do you believe are the causes of the high rate of minority incarceration in the private and public jails?
Professor Gabrinowitz, who would you like to address the question first?
We'll start with you. I have never been in a room with so many quiet lawyers.
It's something we talked about earlier, which is resources and implicit biases. Typically, what you have, minorities are far more likely to rely on the services of a public defender. Because of that, I have I've served as an appointed public defender, as a private attorney, been appointed to act. And what I always tell my client when I am appointed by the circuit court to represent them is that I'm going to give them the exact same service that I give a client who retains me. Now, I have that benefit, being a privately retained attorney, to be able to do that. Our public defenders do not have that sort of that benefit. they are given dozens, if not hundreds of cases, depending on whether they're taking on a slot and what, how large the docket is at any particular time. But when you don't have, criminal cases are often very fact dependent. They're very fact driven. And oftentimes those mitigating circumstances that I talked about earlier, what they require are for me to be able to meet with not only my client, but family members, maybe a pastor, maybe a teacher, maybe a counselor, to learn more about that person, to understand what mitigates the situation that they find themselves in. Perhaps the facts clearly show that they're guilty of an offense and they would be convicted if taken to a jury trial. So some sort of plea or a diversion program, a non-adjudication program, an intervention program like drug court, those may be in their best interest. But you have to have the time to be able to learn about your client, learn about his or her case, in order to be able to best present that to a reasonable assistant district attorney to be able to come up with an offer to do something like that for a client. So what I think you see is, because there's you've got a lack of resources to be able to bring resources to bear to help defend an individual, it makes it more likely that the default is, okay, let's give them this plea with a suspended sentence. Then and a lot of people don't know this, if you are on probation and you violate the terms of your probation, you are not entitled to an attorney to be appointed to represent you. And as such, most people who are there on probation revocation charges are unrepresented. They're what we call in the legal system pro se. They represent themselves. And that typically means that that person is much more likely to go to prison.
Yeah, I'm going to step in for a moment. Steve, I will come back to you, but I think the core of this question, and I would like to make sure we address it, is private versus public jails. What are the pros and cons, and how do you address the high rate of minorities that are incarcerated in private jails and public jails?
Well, the reason we even have private jails is because all of our public jails are full. I mean, we started contracting out to make it, the idea was to make it cheaper and lower tax burdens. The reason, but I think that my answer directly addresses it, because what you have is, when you don't have the ability on the front end of a legal matter, right? If you do not make enough money to go hire your own attorney to represent you, to look and investigate your case, to investigate you, even if it's a case where maybe you, like I say, maybe a plea, or it's not something where you have a great defense in terms of, I'm not guilty of this offense, but you have to have someone who's got the time and the resources to look at the case and go, well, this person has this, whether it's a mental health issue, whatever it may be, to get them on a path out of the criminal justice system. Because that's what the revocation problem is a big part of the problem. People get revoked, they get a probation officer, maybe a public defender brings them a probation offer, and they go, okay, look, you're not going to have to go to prison. You're going to plead to 5 years, but it's all going to be suspended and you're going to be on probation. We never address the underlying problem, which maybe is an addiction problem or a mental health problem. And so they get put back out on probation.
I'm going to step in here because I want to make sure Steve gets his opportunity to address this too. We're coming down to the end.
So I actually have both a public prison and a private prison in my area. Tallahatchie County Correctional Facility. I've again prosecuted Tallahatchie County for the past 8 years. Right down the road, 20 minutes down the road, if that, is Parchment Farm. They're literally night and day to one another. Tallahatchie County Correctional Facility is a newer facility. It's infinitely better run than what MDOC has put forth. The facility is better. The what's available for inmates is better. Across the board, you get a better product in that dichotomy, in that comparison with the private prison compared to Parchment, which has its own reputation and has for as long as it's been in existence. You look at the opposite end, Walnut Grove. Walnut Grove facility was owned by the Mississippi Department of Corrections, but it was managed by a private facility, and that was if you follow up on the lawsuits that have come out of it, it was a nightmare facility. It was a bad concept to begin with. If you put every offender under the age of 26 together, just by the virtue of their age, you're not going to get a good result coming out of that prison. So I think we really need to look much closer at the way the prisons are run. Mississippi Department of Corrections has now and has for as long as I can remember a massive amount of problems where they're just simply warehousing individuals. They release people both on the public side and the private side without any real rehabilitation. There's only a couple things that have started lately. Walnut Grove has a facility that apparently has been working relatively well, where over the last 30 to 90 days of an individual sentence, they're going through a program through there, which mimics or follows a long-term drug and alcohol treatment model, as opposed to, we're just going to put you in a crap situation and open the door and hope for the best and not expect people to reoffend and not expect people to come back.
I'm going to come at this because we each only have about 1 minute left. I want to focus on the high rate of minority incarceration. What causes it? Why is it so high?
Twofold. One, in my experience, I can make a drug court offer, and with a white person, it's accepted. With an African American, it's rejected. So you start off with a distrust of the system in and of itself, and two, there's a whole lot of systemic issues that go along with what will eventually end somebody up in the criminal justice system. The Boy Crisis, which is by Warren Farrell, is a book that I strongly recommend that people look at. It's 400 pages long. I'm not going to be able to even give it any justice, but there are a lot of underlying systemic issues, both nationwide, but also with the family, that need to be addressed to answer that question directly.
Thank you, Steve. James, 1 minute. Why is minority incarceration so high?
So what you see is the youth, this is where youth court and the criminal jurisdiction of county court intersect, right? And what we have is what we know that if you are in youth court and you are delinquent and truant, you are much more likely to end up on the felony criminal docket. And once you are on the felony criminal docket, you are much more likely to ultimately be incarcerated. I'm talking about people of color in this context. So when you are already predetermined as a youth court litigant, you are already set on a path to be in felony court, which is ultimately going to result in your incarceration. Part of my goal, the reason I got in this race, was to help break that pipeline, to stop the transition. And that's going to be done by early intervention, and it's going to be done by addressing the underlying problems, whether it's the parents, whether it's mental health, whether it's drug addiction. We have to get to the root cause. If we're going, it's just like pulling weeds in your garden. If you don't pull the roots up, they're going to come back. That's what I'm going to do as your county court judge, is pull the roots up, help break that pipeline, help us have a better community.
Thank you. And that uses up our time, our allotment for questions. Before we go to closing statements, and I ask my colleague Don, any quick thing you want to add to any of the discussion? You're on mute. Okay, so
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I didn't know if you were asking me if I had another question.
That I was.
Okay, then quickly, I don't know if you can each answer this real quickly, sort of
Okay.
following up. I'm sorry, Joanne.
1 minute each for an answer.
Okay, well, I mean, my question simply is to you, why do you think our criminal justice system fails so miserably in achieving rehabilitation? I mean, we all talk about rehabilitation, but the fact, I think we agree, is our system fails at that. Why?
We
Mr.
try,
Chair.
I'm sorry, we start at the back end. You know, if you start at the earliest possible level in youth court with addressing the underlying issues, you're less likely to have somebody who is a lifelong criminal. If you address the family structure and the family issues, simply by saying, okay, here's a Boy Scout program. If your kid goes to Boy Scouts, they're much less likely to offend. And by the way, you get an hour alone to just become a person again with your 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, all the way up through high school. The life of that parent is better. The life of that child's better. We're just waiting to the end and hoping for the best. So the model is simply broken.
Jamie?
Justice, quickly.
So I talked about it a moment ago. It's that intersection, youth court to criminal, to felony criminal court to prison. That's a big part of it. But one of the other big things that we also have to address is this idea of we're running for election as judges, district attorneys run for election. You get out there and you beat the drum. I'm tough on crime. I'm tough on crime. I'm tough on crime. Tough on crime does not have to mean sending people to prison. It means fixing the crime problem we have in our community. That's what I'm committed to do. And what that means is just what I talked about a moment ago, looking at the root causes, fixing the root causes. We're not always, when I'm elected county court judge, we're going to start at youth court with our youngest people, but we're going to have teenagers. We're going to have teenagers in circuit court and felony court. We're going to have to meet them where they are, bring those resources, do everything we can to turn that around and make them productive members of our community. And that's not going to happen most of the time with a first offender by sending them to prison. Again, I'm talking about nonviolent offenses in those cases.
Thank you. Well, we're at the part of our program where we come up on our closing statements, and we each will have 5 minutes to make a closing statement. And again, back to alphabetical order according to last name. We'll start with Steve Jubera.
So we've talked about a lot of very interesting issues and a lot of issues that are deep and that are systemic, and a lot of assumptions are made. So we have to kind of rely, whoever your judge is going to have to rely on his or her experience. As a sales pitch goes, I've literally been halfway around the world. I've lived in multiple places, from large metropolitan areas to, Martin, Tennessee, which is a town of just a few thousand when school's not in session. I've seen a lot. I've have a lot of experience that we can bring to each and every case that's before the court. The youth court in particular. In all reality, if you have a civil case, you're simply mediating between two opposing parties to make sure that they get a fair shake at the end of the day. If you have a criminal case, the criminal cases that we're going to most likely handle, the non-capital felonies, first offenders, we know what the sentence is going to be. The sentence is going to be consistent with what other similarly situated offenders who've committed a similar crime has done across the judges, across the circuit court judge. It would be grossly unfair for a county court judge to come in and give a sentence that's grossly disproportionate to what our circuit court judges do. It's not fair to the defendant at all. So we're dealing with the youth court, and we're dealing with a good number of ideas as to how we're going to best put our children, abused and neglected children, as well as the delinquent children, in the best chance to succeed and become productive members of society. I strongly support programs that exist already. I mentioned Boy Scouts. I'm a big supporter of the Marine Corps Junior ROTC at the high school. Lafayette County also has an ROTC program. Things like that are going to give parents an opportunity, again, to be an adult, B, to provide an activity outside of the home that the child needs, and C, possibly something that a parent that would end up before my court never even contemplated. That it would be a bridge too far for them, or they believe it to be a bridge too far for them to get their kid to a Boy Scout program. Okay, that's something that partnering with Child Protective Services is very easy to do, and pass on that information to them. Encourage those organizations to open their doors and bring these kids in. But you also have to take the kids where they are. If there is a underlying mental health issue that has to be addressed, we've got to look at it. If somebody walked into a courtroom with, their arm cut off, literally bleeding, obviously we're going to treat them for the injury they have presented before the court. It's a judge, a lawyer, bailiff, whoever. But if somebody walks into a courtroom with an obvious mental health issue, serious mental health issue, not routine depression, but we're talking bipolar, schizophrenic, actively exhibiting symptoms, why are we treating that person differently than somebody with a obvious gushing wound? We shouldn't. We treat the silly thing that we do as a society is we treat injuries above the neck differently than injuries below the neck. And that's something that can easily be addressed. It's not an easy problem to solve, not by any stretch of the imagination, but can be addressed. And you start to get better solutions for that individual before the court, for their family as a whole, and for society in general.
Thank you, Steve. Your closing statement, James?
Thank you so much. I want to begin by addressing, I noticed one of the questions in the chat that we didn't get to talk about, and it touches on mental health as well. It was a question, would I consider hiring a mental health professional on staff? And the short answer to that is yes, and I'll go you one better. One of the things that I'm proudest of in my time as an attorney is the pro bono initiative at the University of Mississippi named me Attorney of the Year in 2014, I believe it was 2014, 2015. And that was for pro bono service. We had a Lafayette County Bar Luncheon a few weeks ago where pro bono service was discussed. There were candidates there at that luncheon. I was at the pro bono clinic that Judge Bob Whitwell, who is one of our chancellors, held last week. I was the only candidate out of all 8 candidates running who participated in the pro bono service clinic. How does this tie together? We have a number of well-respected and very good mental health professionals in Lafayette County. What I want to do is ask every one of them to start donating an hour of their time, whether it's an hour a week, an hour every 2 weeks, to help with these systems, to help with people who couldn't otherwise afford to go see a mental health professional except through the Department of Mental Health, the State Department of Mental Health and Communicare. Now, during this election, I have enjoyed the opportunity. We've got 8 candidates running. 5 of us live here in the city of Oxford. We've got one that lives on one side of the county and 2 on the other. I've enjoyed the opportunity to get from Lafayette Springs to Tula to Takapola to Paris to Yacna to Harmontown, all the way around Lafayette County. There are issues within the city that are different than the issues we have out in our more rural parts of the county. As an attorney over the last 18 years, I've practiced in the 3 areas that this court is going to oversee, literally since the day I was licensed to practice law. I was sworn into the practice of law. I put my hand on the Bible and I raised my right hand and I took the oath as an attorney at around 11 a.m. And at 1 p.m., I was in court, in justice court, handling criminal matters for clients. Now, I had attorneys who were helping me, overseeing me, supervising me as I started off on my career. But throughout the last 18 years, I have worked in all 3 areas. Those are the 3 main areas that your court is going to oversee: civil cases up to 200,000, misdemeanor criminal appeals, felonies from circuit court, as well as youth court. I got in this race because of the youth court. Our children are the future of this community. What we do for these at-risk children, these children who are in situations that are not desirable, is going to dictate the community that we leave, not only for them, but for our children, our grandchildren, and generations to come. Now, I'm committed to work just as hard as your county court judge as I have been getting to all those communities in Lafayette County, getting around the city of Oxford, to help start early and get children in a better place, right? The best interest of our children is going to be my guiding principle in youth court. Now, my plan is to take drug court and youth court, integrate services to help do more with less.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've come to the end of our time. I want to thank the candidates for coming to spend time with us. And I want to remind everybody that next week we have 2 more sessions. One is on Tuesday, October 18th, and that session will be candidates Kilpatrick and Tatum. And then we will have a session on Thursday, October 20th. And the candidates speaking that night are Turner and Waller. So before I hand it over to our co-president, Don, any closing statement?
No, I just want to thank our candidates who participated tonight and everybody else for attending. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Over to you, our co-president, Ruth Odell.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here tonight. I think this is pretty interesting. I have really enjoyed listening to both these gentlemen. Done a good job. Next week, as they said, we have 2 more of these things. And so we hope that you'll come back. And if you found these enjoyable and not, educational for you, I hope you'll come back and hear the other 4 candidates. This is the first time the League of Women Voters has had every single candidate running for a position to be willing to participate in a forum. And my hat's off to all of them for coming and being here. Come back next week. I will load the video from tonight. I will load that in the morning, and I'll try to put a link. We will put a link on our website, as well as put it on our Facebook and some other things, which would make it easy for candidates to share on their own. Okay. All righty. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed the conversation tonight, Steve.
He did too. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.